Working?
Okay.
Well, I have no idea. That's a new one. Okay, well, gosh.
It's the wonders of Zoom.
Yes, indeed. Well, I'm sure I was doing something goofy, but
No,
anyway,
turn it off and on often helps.
yeah. So anyway, welcome everybody. Thanks so much for the invitation to talk about this subject, which is based on a trip that Arlene and I took just about 4 years ago, exactly. It's probably the most wonderful trip we've ever taken, and we've done quite a few. But anyway, there it is. We're going to, went to the end of the earth on the southern side and visited, started in Ushuaia, Argentina, which is the southernmost city of any size in the Western Hemisphere. And then we went to the Falkland Islands. Then we came down and went over to the South Georgia Island, and then finally ended up by going down and actually walking around a little bit on Antarctica proper, on the Antarctic Peninsula, visiting a number of islands and areas along the coast. So anyway, this is a real non-technical just overview of things that we saw while we were there. And it's, as I said, it's not got a lot of scientific information, but hopefully you'll find it interesting to see all the great things that we saw down there. So as I said, we started in Ushuaia, this little city at the tip of Argentina. Just an interesting geographical thing. I didn't realize this, but Tierra del Fuego, this part of Argentina, isn't even connected to the rest of Argentina. The only way you can get to it is by going through Chile. And anyway, that was where we started, and that's where we got on the ship, which was called the motor vessel Hebridean Sky. It's this little guy here in the middle. These are larger expedition ships, but ours was only about 100 passengers, and it was just absolutely fantastic in every respect. So that's where we departed. But before we departed, we spent a few days in Ushuaia and visited some of the areas there, which were extremely interesting and beautiful. And in particular, the national park there, the Tierra del Fuego National Park. So I'm just going to show you pictures of things that we took and that I tried to identify either in the field, which wasn't very much, or after the fact. So I'm not going to be able to tell you too much about these, but these are some of the things that we encountered. This plant, of course, occurs all over the world. Everywhere we've been, we come across Armeria. And as you probably know, there are the southern beech, the Notophagus, is one of the dominant trees in the southern hemisphere. So these were Notophagus forests there. I couldn't always identify things. I'm not sure this is correct, but there were some escaped garden plants and so forth in the park, and this being perhaps one of them, I'm just not sure. But here's, of course, a nice native plant, one of the orchids. There were a number of orchids here. It's a very lush, moist, beautiful environment. Tons of lichens, none of which I identified, but there they are. I think I could get maybe some to genus perhaps. And mosses and lichens everywhere, just really beautiful. Again, another orchid. And I'm not sure if that's right. I just couldn't be sure, but I know there are a lot of escaped cultivated plants growing in the park. This is a native species. This was kind of cool. I'd never heard of this thing before. It's a so-called false mistletoe. It's not the full-fledged mistletoe, but it's similar to it. And it grows in the extreme end of South America. Then I got to insert pictures of birds now and then and other animals. Here's a liverwort that we came across. And as you probably know, the distribution, the biogeography of these plants is very interesting. It's so-called Gondwana Distribution, where there are plants closely related to one another in these widely dispersed areas, New Zealand, Australia, and then in South America, presumably because they, at the time of Gondwana land, their ancestors were connected, and then they got split apart. And so you see a very interesting distribution of a number of these plants in that area. But here's then the Nothophagus being one example of that, which is very common in New Zealand and then also in South America. So here's the forest, tons of lichens, just a really lush habitat. Quickly go through this. They had a neat little train in the park, and I'm a train buff, sort of, and this just was really cool. It's a real steam locomotive, and this is a replica of the train of the early railroad that was there. It was actually prisoners that were housed in this area originally, and the train was part of that. But anyway, more pictures of the park, very neat area. Some more orchids. So this will give you a very quick overview of some of the things that we saw there. This little guy is all over the diddle dee. It's a very common plant, a little almost prostrate little guy that grew. We encountered in many places in Falkland Islands and elsewhere, Lycopodium.
It's a lot like Cheminoir.
There's one lichen that I'm able to identify. Fungi, very lush area, mosses. Again, no names.
Well, the big one was a sphagnum.
Oh, yes. Well, thank you. Unfortunately, the hand of man, of course, is always there to screw things up. And at some point back in the 19th century, they thought, gee, it'd be great to bring beavers down here and let them do their thing. And that's been an environmental disaster. So there are beaver ponds here that have killed a lot of the trees and disrupted the environment in many different ways, but that's typical. I'm not sure that's right, but I think it may be. Okay, the upland goose is really common, a beautiful bird. We saw it in many, many places. Southern lapwing and the southern caracara. Most of these pictures, by the way, were taken by Arlene, so I kind of give her credit for that, particularly the birds, but probably 80% of these photos were all taken by Arlene. This was a real bird we were really hoping to see, the Megalithic woodpecker. It's a real charismatic species there, and unfortunately we saw it. Lightless steamer ducks and kelp gull. There's a baby one. Spectacled duck. The birds were great. Everything was great, actually. So this was the height of summer when we were there. We were in January and early February. Okay, so anyway, we left on the ship then from Ushuaia by sailing east along the Beagle Canal. So this is the Beagle Canal here, that famous place I'm sure you're familiar with. And out we went, headed bound for the Falkland Islands. And these are some of the birds we saw along the way. The black-browed albatross is something that we encountered many other places on our journey, and it was very common, and we got some great interaction with that. Southern giant petrel. Okay, so here's South Argentine Sea. There's the Falkland Islands. And here we see slender-billed prion, a lot of black-browed albatross in the air. These birds are just amazing. This wingspan is like, God, I don't know, 10 feet at least. Okay, so we got to the Falklands, and that was really interesting. There was, we made 3 major stops. We first arrived and came to this West Point Island. Then we went to Saunders Island, and then we came over to Stanley, which is the capital. And of course, I'm sure you all remember all the unpleasantness that took place there in 1984 when the Argentines attempted to retake this from the British. And that wasn't a happy time there, but things have calmed down since then. But anyway, the plan was we'd come on the ship and then we'd go ashore in Zodiac rafts. And we used those extensively throughout the entire expedition. So anyway, the first stop was this West Point Island, which was a fairly small little isolated place. 2 people lived there, a man and wife. And I'll say a bit more about them later, but it was just really most interesting. There was a number of interesting birds there, not tons of plants, but I looked at as many as I could. The flora of the Falkland Islands is shown here with a lot of non-native species, 178 native, and so forth. But largely grasslands, tussock grasses, these big clumpy things here. And there is an albatross, and this is the tussock grass, which is so common throughout the area. But the nice thing, the most interesting point there was there's actually a black-browed albatross colony, which we could visit, and the birds are so tame, and we tried to be very careful, which we were, but you can just, go right up and take pictures of them, which was really nice because they're just so beautiful and are not really bothered by people as long as they behave themselves. So this was all in that colony. There's a little guy. And there were some, this was our first penguin, the southern rockhopper, which is really a crazy little guy. He's got an amazing haircut, kind of cool eyebrows and stuff too, but really something. So they were kind of mingling around amongst the albatross. Here's a little bird possibly working on a nest, not sure. One of the other grasses that was in the area that I think I identified correctly. This was a neat thing that was growing right by the colony next to it. I thought it was just a mossy rocks when I first looked at it, but it's actually a plant that's, it's an umbel, so-called balsam rock, bolax, something I never heard of before, but that was very attractive there. There's some other plants that we encountered at the colony, growing like on the cliffs and so forth. This coastal Nazarevia, I guess I pronounce that. Well, crassula. And then there's the old things that you see everywhere in the world, such as this guy, Zerastrium or Vensi. Hebe is a plant that I guess it's a Gondwana thing because it's all over. It's in New Zealand, certainly it's a very common plant there. Pardon me, but it was also for several species in the Falkland Islands.
Well, it's being put back in Veronica now.
Oh, is it back to Veronica? Well, doggone, okay. Is it back in
Woody
the
Veronica.
Scrofulary ACE yet?
I'm sorry.
Is it back into the Scrofulary ACE yet?
No, I don't think it's back there.
Yeah, I mean, it used to be, wasn't it, Scroff? Until
yeah.
Scroffs got decimated. Oh, so it is back to Veronica. Okay, cool. You have to, it's keeping up with those things is difficult for me, believe me. And this was an oxalis that was kind of fun to see there. Anyway, we're just about finished on the island, and on our way back, we stopped the ship made arrangements, which is, I guess, fairly common. This man and woman live. They're the only two human beings that live on this little island. This is their home. They have this nice little garden. In the front part of their garden, they have a Monterey cypress. There are no trees native to the Falkland Islands, but they've planted ones such as this, which is, can handle the situation there fairly well adapted. And there's other North American conifers or Northern Hemisphere conifers that they've planted here and there, but certainly not a lot of trees. And here's their garden. And this is where we came in. Our ship docked, anchored out here, and then we came in on the Zodiac rafts that you see there. But anyway, this is the woman that lives there with her husband, and she prepares for these groups that come and visit a huge spread, afternoon tea for everybody. And she bakes all of these cakes and cookies and everything, and that was really fun. But anyway, off we went, and there's the view from there. Okay, then we went to the Saunders Island, which is up here, and here's what we found there. Not too many plants, at least ones that I could have time to fiddle with, but this was one, the sea cabbage, which is very common. It's all over the beaches and so forth. Here's some of the birds, orchid catcher, dolphin gull. And now we're starting to see some other neat penguins, such as the Gentoo. And there they are. These penguins are just so much fun to watch. They're so klutzy walking along on land. They're just kind of wobbling around and stumbling. But boy, when they get in the water, that's where they rule the roost. And here's the Kingpin Penguin, another new species for us. There he is. You can just see him kind of, wobbling along. And the little Gentoo babies, they just lie flat on the ground like this, which was kind of neat. They can't get up and walk, but they like to lie flat for a long time. Another new species was the Megalithic Penguin, which is a little small guy. And here you see them lined up where we came ashore. Here's a brown alga, giant kelp. There was a lot of that on the beach. Okay, so then we took off and we went to the East Falkland Islands, over here where the capital of Stanley is. But we also visited, spent a little time there, but we also went to a place called Bertha's Beach, which is maybe an hour's drive from Stanley. And there you see the landscape. It's fairly grim, no trees, lots of grass. Here's some of the plants that we saw at this. This is a kind of a natural area of this beach, which is well known in the islands. And some fairly common things. Rumex acetosella, which grows everywhere in the world, I guess. And this was kind of a neat fern that I had found. And this is actually a Baccharis. It's a very low growing thing. It's not like a shrub as we typically think of it in North America, at least. And here's hawkweed and some more little young penguins there. Kelp geese, we saw those in a lot of places. Another king penguin. Here's an aster, marsh daisy. This little guy, buttonweed. And this was real cool. Subsequently discovered, after I figured out after we got back what this thing was, it's actually a iris, which is the national flower of the Falklands. And they have stamps. I got all of these, of course, off the internet after I got home. So that was a beautiful little plant there. There's the diddle dee again, which we saw in Ushuaia. There's a rush. And this was another totally cool plant, which I had never heard of before. But that in fact was, we found that there too. Okay, then we're over to Stanley, the capital. And that was just a real interesting little place. It's a little bit of England settled down in the South Atlantic. And so there's a lot of English architecture, and these are whale bones that they made this thing out of. And here's the housing. So it's just very British and very interesting, just walking around town and seeing things. But I did see some plants and birds and stuff there, and these are some of the things that we encountered. Not terribly rare or exciting, but there they are. I think that's right. I'm not positive. Chime in if these are totally off scale somewhere, but there's another oxalis. This is that one we saw before. There's a pink and a white form of it. Here's some imperial cormorants that were right at the dock. Megalithic cormorants. Here's the Falklands steamer dock. Some more kelp geese. Kelp gull. Okay, so then it's off to South Georgia Island. And these are all the individual stops that we made along there. And the South Georgia Island was just beyond all imagining. It was so interesting and beautiful. And here's a picture, a map of the island. We cruised along the northeastern coast for the most part. And we finally ended up by going up this little fjord here. But this was, we made a number of stops along there, and they were just spectacular. Okay, so I'll just go through these individual ones. Here's Fortuna Bay. And and one thing I might add, that you may notice, we were so lucky. The weather was absolutely fantastic our entire trip. It was just amazing, because that's not that common that you'd have that great of weather. But here we are chugging off in the Zodiac rafts, the shore. There's the penguins over there. And so here we are on shore, and there are all kinds of little fur seal pups all over the place, sunning themselves. Absolutely priceless little guys. There's one with mom, and a bunch of king penguins hanging out. And we could see them, going in and out of the water, which was a lot of fun. Okay, then we'll go to this. I don't know how to pronounce this. It's a Norwegian name. The good old Norwegians were down here starting in the early 19th century. I think it was about 1904, and running whaling operations. Finally pulled up stakes in 1966 after the whales had been pretty much decimated. They were just gone. Hundreds of thousands of whales were slaughtered here and processed at this whaling station, which was, and some of the old stuff is still there. Really disgusting, but there it is. And all this slaughter, that natural resource for oil, for lamp oil, anyway. So anyway, the Norwegians shut down in about 1966, but now there's some museums here and this historic stuff such as the church and so on. But now, fortunately, there's no whaling going on. And here is the, we first saw the elephant seals big time. These guys are just such a crack up. They just blop down on the ground, lay all over each other. And here are some of the other animals we saw there. First time we saw the chin strap penguin, which has this little chin strap. There's this cap and the little strap that holds it. This guy's sleeping now. There's a kind of a famous cemetery at the whaling station where over the years people who died there were buried there. The most famous thing, though, is the grave for this Ernest Shackleton, whom you may have known was one of the very famous early 19th century, or rather 20th century explorers, along with people like Falcon Scott and Amundsen and all those guys that were exploring Antarctica back in the early decades of the 20th century. He died very young. He was just in his 40s, late 40s when he died, and he was buried here, which was probably very appropriate. I'll just quickly say the history of this with Shackleton is just amazing. He dreamed up this expedition. He never made it to the South Pole, but he always wanted to. But anyway, he's in the 1914, right at the outset of World War I, he got an expedition set up that was going to do a completely cross Antarctica, and of course, going to the pole. And this was his ship, the Endurance. And as you can see here, it didn't turn out too well. I'll just quickly go through this because I don't have tons of time. But anyway, this expedition was designed to land here on the continent, to go by foot, pulling sledges to the South Pole, then to the Beardmore Glacier. And while he's doing that, another expedition was going to come from Hobart, Australia, Tasmania, come up here and bring supplies and then lay supplies all along the pass. So he'd have enough resources to come back to Ross Island and completely transect Antarctica. Well, what could go wrong with that? So the second leg, this down here, was very poorly planned, underfunded. It's just a miracle that these guys got up there, but they did. And they started laying the resources for Shackleton, which was of absolutely no need, because Shackleton got as far as here and his ship gets locked in the ice. And that's the end of the whole story as far as trying to transect Antarctica. It was just a total disaster. But anyway, here he is, they're locked in the ice. The crew's trying to break through, cut by hand paths out of the ice. That isn't going to work. The ship gets crushed, and the whole crew now has to try to get the hell out of there. And they're on an ice floe that's drifting north. They're pulling their one lifeboat, and they eventually get into open water. They're able to all get over to this place called Elephant Island. And unbelievably, Shackleton is able to take a small crew with him and sail. This is in the museum on the island now that shows this James Caird, which was the name of their one lifeboat. And Shackleton and 3 others sail all the way up here back to South Georgia Island. Just unbelievable that they make this. And then once they land on the west side of South Georgia, so 2 of them, Shackleton and one other guy, have to hike all the way across over to the whaling station. It's just unbelievable. They get there, and long story short, they're able to get some boats. They go and pick up the guys back on Elephant Island. They bring them all back to safety, and nobody dies. It's just amazing. Although the expedition was just a total disaster from the start, but it ended by the fact that no one died. But anyway, here we are back now looking at some grasses, and Rob Soaring. Is Rob here? Are you there, Rob?
Yep, I'm here.
Rob kindly sent me some very interesting information about the grass, some of the grasses in South Georgia Island, and a possible new species of POA, which I guess is this guy right here that's sitting here. But anyway, Rob, would you mind explaining what's going on there?
Well, yeah, the researchers from Kew were down there trying to clean up the invasive species, and they found this POA they couldn't identify. Turns out it's quite widespread in the island, but it has never been collected before 2019, I think. Anyway, they put these metal stakes in around it, this particular plant, to keep the seals from destroying it. The big tussock grasses are all Poa flabolita, but nobody knew what this one was. So anyway, Q's down there trying to clean up, got crews down there trying to clean up all the invasive plants. They don't know what this one was. So we're still trying to figure that out.
Huh. So it's still being evaluated as to what the heck the thing is.
That's right.
Interesting. Wow. Well, that's, and that wasn't until 2019 that this was discovered?
Yeah, either that or 2020.
Uh-huh. Wow. Interesting. Well, it'll be fun to see what they come up with on that. Well, thanks for sending that, Ron. Okay, this shows, I guess this map that you also sent me, it's been found in a number of different places, right?
Yeah, it's pretty widespread. It's never very common, but it's the widespread. They've found more locations now.
Yeah, amazing. Okay, well, moving on then from the whaling station, the next stop was this Gold Harbor, which was just, oh my God. Marion, this may be where your, the picture that you showed me, you painted was from, but this was just,
Could be. I'll check, Doug, and let you know. That's beautiful, though.
oh, but this, I mean, this is just surreal, you know? So we're chugging up in our little Zodiac raft, and look at this. I mean, you can't believe it, you know? And as I said, the weather was just awesome. So there's
Wow.
just thousands of penguins here, and these are the passengers of the crew on the ship, and we could just wander around and introduce ourselves to these guys. So these were mainly king penguins, just a stunningly beautiful animal. There's a young one. And then they'd go off and jump into the surf and paddle around and then come back. And there are a lot of fur seals was the other very, very common animal there, along with the elephant seals, which were plopped down all over the place. And they're just totally a crack up to watch. Sort of bouncing around. This is the brown skuas. They prey on the little young penguins. So they're kind of a nasty thing. Here's one eating a penguin, as this guy does too, the sheathbill. Kind of an ugly bird. Okay, then off to the next stop was Cooper Bay. And of course, there are all these cool glaciers and everything. And here's some macaroni penguins doing their thing in the water. As I said, boy, they're really a lot more agile on water. There's a chin strap, king penguin. And this was a macaroni penguin colony that was there. Okay, then this is that fjord I mentioned, this is the southern end. We sailed up that and then came back out. It had some great views of things there and some birds. South Georgia shag, Cape petrel, snow petrel. Bryan Island was another totally cool place, which was our next stop. Here we are coming up to it. Settings are just amazing. Here you see the giant kelp, one of the kelps there, one of the algae. There's the northern giant petrel. More fur seals. And this is a very interesting bird, the South Georgia pipit. It's the only passerine species in the Arctic region. And it's endemic to South Georgia Island. And it's a very, very interesting bird. And happy to say, there had been rats, of course, introduced to South Georgia, and apparently those have been eradicated for the most part through a very extensive effort to do so. And the prospects for this little guy have improved significantly since the rats were, they think, totally gone by 2015. But that was a real neat bird. We were real happy to find that. Here's another brown skua doing its thing, and an immature Antarctic tern. It's another bird we encountered. The big highlight of this stop, however, was to go up this little stairway from the water to a wandering albatross nest. We couldn't go close. This was taken with big lens, but so we weren't bothering it. But you could see it, and of course, that's just an amazing bird. Okay, Salisbury Plain was the next stop, and there we are heading out, and hello, another few penguins hanging out there. Again, just mind-boggling, to see these guys. And there they are, and we could walk around and look at them. They were actually having a meeting there. I didn't realize that, but nevertheless, that was maybe why they were all there. More fur seals, some really cute ones there. There's a little guy taking a nap. More king penguins. There's a young guy. Okay, so now it was off to the Antarctic Peninsula, and these are all the places that we kind of sailed by, or we only got on the mainland at this last stop, which was a Chilean, actually Air Force installation. Many, many countries have little tiny settlements on the peninsula, but these others were, some we just sailed by, sailed around. Some we did stop at and get off by going from the zodiac rafts. But anyway, this is as far south as we got, which was this Chilean station. And that was 64 degrees, 51 minutes south. Of course, it was still a long ways to the South Pole, but at least it was on the continent. The flora of Antarctica, I've just kind of summarized here. There are approximately 100 mosses, 50 liverworts. The algae, there's some 700 recorded species, and some have been collected as far south as 86 degrees, 29 minutes, if you can imagine. It's almost to the pole. And here's some others. This is not my picture. I took this, but it's cool. And a tipped over iceberg had a brown algae growing on the underside of it. Lichens, about 200 species. And the fun thing is the vascular plants. It doesn't take long to learn the vascular flora of Antarctica. There are 2 species, okay? And one is this grass, this Jampia antarctica, Antarctic hairgrass. There it is. And this is the other one, the Antarctic pearlwort, Caryophyllaceae. And I did not take either of these pictures because I never saw this, to tell you that. I think I saw the grass from one of our trips in the Zodiac raft when we went close to shore. But this I don't think I ever saw that. But anyway, those are the only 2 vascular plants in all of Antarctica. Then Elephant Island, this is sailing south. And we passed some interesting things, like there's Elephant Island. That's where good old Shackleton landed, and from whence he departed on his rescue trip back to South Georgia Island. There were about 30 guys in his crew, and he left them all, 26 of them there, and he and three other guys went back to Elephant Island or to South Georgia. So here's where we started seeing some neat icebergs as we're heading down to the peninsula itself. And here now we're getting there. And this is where we had opportunities to go onto the islands with the zodiac graphs. Chin straps. It's a cute little guy. Chin strap colony. There's the Antarctic shag. These guys look like they don't have any trouble sleeping. Okay, then we passed through this strait along the way, and here's some of the things we encountered, which is the first whales that we saw, killer whales. We learned on the ship that there's an interesting program. Oh, I didn't mention it, but on the ship, they had just an incredibly wonderful group of naturalists who provided guidance, lectures at night, representing a whole bunch of different specialties, marine mammals. They didn't have a botanist there, as you might imagine, but they had a number of people, a bird guy, they were all excellent. And the woman who was the marine mammal one explained that there's a program, we weren't aware of it, but that will identify whales by, if you can get a good picture of the tail fin, goes into this database and you can track where the thing is going as if people report it. So this guy, for example, may have headed north at some point. Someone takes a picture of it. It's in the database and they can match it exactly and tell you where it is. So we in fact did that. Arlene did that on a couple that she had pictures of. The other species of whale that we encountered there was the humpback. And there it is. So this guy, for example, has a much more complicated pattern on its tail fin, which would go into that database. And I think she probably tracked that one. Okay, moving right along. This was our next visiting site. This gorgeous landscapes. And then Gold Harbor. Let's see. I did this, right? We already did this. Oh, brother. I must have put this in there twice. Sorry about that. We'll zip right through those. Oh gosh, what happened here? I must have
Are
duplicated.
you going backwards?
No, I'm going
Doug?
forward. I
Okay.
must have duplicated. Let me see. Let me get, well, let me just go through. God knows what I did. Dolphin Island. Oh, you get to see these again. Okay.
What was, Doug, what was the temperature? Just the air temperature by any, do you remember?
I don't remember precisely. It wasn't, horribly cold. It was definitely chilly. How's that for a good answer? But you had to kind of bundle up when we went out, but it wasn't horrible. I'd say probably like in the typical day we were there, maybe it was in the 40s, the high. Okay, now we're back. I think we're back to ones we haven't seen yet. Oh, gosh. Okay, so this was this other island we visited, crab eater seals, and then Danko Island. I don't know how I got those slides duplicated in here. This was a cool place. Gentoos in the water. There's a crab eater seal. And then you'd see little colonies of penguins just sitting out on an iceberg like that. Okay, well, we're almost to the end. So this was our last stop. And this was, as I mentioned, was this Chilean outpost where we were able to actually go onto land that was part of the continent. And this was 64 degrees, 51 minutes south. And this was very nice. They were just super hospitable there. The Chilean military ran this thing. And there was go in, we had a nice cup of tea there and could look at the animals, and of course, and mainly Gentoo penguins were there. So anyway, from there we proceeded back north towards South America and Ushuaia, passing by some beautiful scenery on the way at this Paradise Harbor. And so that was pretty much it. The last excitement, however, was to be able to go through the Drake Passage, which you may have heard of, is probably the roughest, most severe water course on the planet. And it was pretty rough. But nevertheless, we made it. And we didn't have any seasickness problems at all to speak of. Arlene was feeling a little woozy during this part, but we used those little patches, that those seasickness things you put on your neck, and they worked fine. But this was the only place where we really hit some really, really rough weather. So then it was back to Ushuaia, and there we were. Okay, so there it is, and thanks very much. If any questions, that was kind of a real quickie tour, but I hope that wasn't too bad. Anyway, thank you.
Let's see.
It was wonderful, Doug. The photos were fantastic.
Oh, thank you.
So I'm gonna stop sharing, and
Okay.
and people can put their questions in the chat. I did discover that the State of the Union apparently started at 8. Usually they start at 9.
Oh,
No, that's just the 8 to
Is that the
9 is,
preview? Is that the
Yeah.
attendance? Okay.
yeah,
All right, good.
yeah, it said
Um,
9 online.
Good.
yeah, so
Okay.
we're cool. Right.
Okay, good. So
Mhm.
yeah, well, I mean, it's a small enough group. People can just speak up. I'll start. I had a question about the orcas real quick. Is that a southern species, or is that the same that you'd find in the like Seattle, Washington area up north?
Yeah. Gosh, I'm sorry, I don't know. I suspect it's probably a different species, you know. But
I'll look it up. That's okay.
Yeah,
That's
I mean,
fine.
they're
I was
of
just
course,
curious.
so common in the North Pacific. But I'm afraid I don't know.
They are certainly a different group.
Yeah,
They
Yeah.
do not go back and forth.
I wouldn't think so, but that would be.
No, and the Pacific ones are close to dying out. Their reproduction rate is lower than their death rate, and there are all sorts of problems with having enough food and also being caught in nets.
Oh, boy. You mean just a byproduct from net fishing, or not intentional, but
Yeah, they're in significant danger off our coast.
well, that's too bad. Yeah.
I might mention that my journal club at Georgetown covered killer whales last week, and there have been recent spottings of their killing regular whales and eating them. There's 2 YouTubes on this, but before a few years ago, this was never seen or apparently recorded by anybody. And one question that came up is, well, how long have they been doing this? But someone said they're starving and so forth. So maybe this is due to starvation. But I don't know why it could happen for thousands of years, but there's just records from the last decade or so. We have a dolphin group at Georgetown, and one of them presented a talk on that.
Well, Ed, you said the killer whales this was the first time they were shown to attack other whales?
Yeah, it's been rarely seen, but there are 2 YouTubes on it. Somebody photographed it in the last, I don't know, 5 or 10 years. I forgot the dates on the YouTubes. And then there was a scientific note on it, which was about 4 pages long, and I forgot what journal, but we actually covered that article last week.
Wow, interesting.
Well, I know this is a botany society,
I know, but he brought them up.
but there was a show a few years ago, a nature show, that I had a big Canadian research group that studied the killer whales and narwhals up in the Arctic Ocean. And I really came to dislike the orcas because they came all the way up from the Pacific, Southern Pacific. They came all the way up and they pretty much just rounded up a whole pod of like 20 narwhals and obliterated them and didn't even eat them. So my feeling is they've gone a little bit bananas. That's my professional expert opinion. And so, I'm like, man, when they start going after narwhals, they gotta go. I like narwhals.
Well, maybe
There's
they
something
were
weird.
getting wiped out in the Northern Pacific,
Yeah, there's something weird going on. It's probably climate change related.
Well, there's so much that's impacting.
Yeah.
I didn't say a word about it, of course, but Antarctica is, oh my God, who knows what's going to go on down there. Things are really crazy. And
Yeah.
it's, I'm sure you've all heard about the great concerns for what's ice sheets collapsing and everything else. So, I don't know. Well, okay.
I noticed.
I want to thank Arlene for her wonderful photographs of birds.
Yes.
We
Yes.
did the members program talking about your area of Arizona. You used a lot of her bird pictures, and I hope you'll do a longer program for us.
Yeah, sure.
Arizona.
Well, that I misjudged, obviously, how much time I could.
We enjoyed every slide.
Right, exactly. So,
Melanie I think had a question. Melanie, do you have a question?
Well, I had noticed that at least your second slide that you had thought was an oxalis appears to be something in Brassicaceae.
oh,
and
is it? Okay.
I didn't get a real good look at the first one, but it looked kind of like a dianthus or something like that to me. So you might want to look at those. I know there are all kinds of fascinating oxalis out there. You might want to recheck those.
Well, thanks. I will check those. I had, it didn't look too much like oxalis to me, actually, but the references that I have, that was the closest I could get to it. But thank you. I'm sure you're right on that. So I'll scope those out some more. Okay.
I don't know if anybody wants to go back to killer whales, but I found an article, the first 3 records of killer whales killing and eating blue whales. It's in the Marine Mammal Science Journal. Just in case you want to look it up, Doug, I don't know.
Yeah. And what is the approximate date on that? Was that, I mean, that's really
This
recent.
article is March 2021.
Wow. Interesting. Okay. God, that must be something to see a killer whale going after a blue whale.
Well, they
Yeah.
hunt, they're in packs, right? They're like wolf packs, so.
Uh-huh.
They hunt in packs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dogs.
Huh.
Yeah, they're like aquatic dogs. They're really, really intelligent. I mean, they plan, they scheme, they communicate with each other. They're pretty amazing.
Huh. Amazing.
They're kind of scary.
Do they ever go after narwhals?
Yeah, they do.
He's
Yeah,
making a joke.
I know.
But you know, nature's neutral, so whom are we to judge these whales?
Exactly.
Yeah, but I think they've been influenced by our screwing with the planet. That's my basic feeling.
Yeah.
Oh, okay,
My basic scientific expertise on,
we've been a bad influence.
yeah.
Okay.
Something's weird about it.
Right.
Doug, I'm intrigued by the couple on West Point Island. Were they associated there with some sort of lighthouse or prior settlement? And I mean, I would assume they're not self-sufficient there and they prepare all this for you. Does the ship bring them supplies or they must get regular,
Yeah.
supplies from
Well,
other places?
Yeah, it was just fascinating. They're the only two people, this man and wife, that lived there. And they actually have sheep. So they farm, graze sheep there, and that's what they do for a living. This little side business of doing the teas for the visitors is something else. But yeah, I talked to the woman for a while. It was just fascinating how you could survive it. They go over to Stanley, to the other parts of the Falklands occasionally. She had made one trip back to England at one point because they're English, but that's where they are. I mean, I guess they get supplies, that they can't, because they can't really grow enough there for themselves. So it's pretty amazing, I must say.
Doug, what was your time frame for the trip?
Yeah, it was about mid-January to mid-February.
Okay.
So it was the absolute peak of the summer. Basically.
Yep.
And,
Hey, Doug, Steve Lonker here. I had a question for you. And a couple people brought up the paleoclimate, and there are very few terrestrial paleoclimatic studies done on the high latitude South Atlantic. And I was seeing those C3 tussock grasses. I was wondering if you or anybody else here are aware of carbon isotopic studies done on peat formed by these C3 tussock grasses, giving these detailed climatic variations over time.
You mean studies that would evaluate the peat to draw inferences about earlier climatic conditions?
They're using carbon isotopes on the C3 tussock grasses that form the peat. Are you or anybody else aware of it?
Boy, I'm afraid I'm not, Steve. Maybe is Rob still here? I don't know if you know
I'm
anything
not
about
familiar with the particular study. What's the upshot of the isotope study in the peat?
Oh, I'm not aware. I was asking. I was just very curious about it because I know there's a lack of data on the high latitude South Atlantic terrestrial paleoclimatic variation. And those tussock grasses really grabbed my attention. So I was just curious about that. I thought someone would know.
That's all the big ones are Poa flabellata.
Yeah.
Penguins like to nest in them.
Yeah.
Seals.
Well, that would be interesting
hang
to
out in them.
know that, I must say. I bet you could get some interesting insight into what's
Yeah, it's so important. Yeah, I was curious if someone was aware of it. Okay.
Okay.
So Doug, Ed here, do you have any idea how so many invasive plant species got there? One thing that I thought you showed was the plain old oxeye daisy, which I think is Leucanthemum, something
Right.
Bulgari or something now. And it seemed like there are a lot of European, well, I didn't say that many invasives, but it seemed like European invasives. Did they come in crop seeds or what?
Well, that's a good question, Ed. Those that you were referring to were mainly in Ushuaia, in that national park, the
Okay.
Tierra del Fuego National Park. So it's an area that would have a lot more exposure to, human beings, because it's not densely populated there, but there. And God knows Darwin could have been throwing stuff off when he was chugging through there on the
Oh, yeah,
Beagle, He was
that
doing
Chuck.
all kinds of crazy. Yeah. Anyway, but seriously, I don't know. But I can imagine, because it's certainly an area that's much more populated, that those, and you'd see, I mean, there were, settlements with houses and so forth, and gardens and so forth with
Oh, okay. There could have been garden plants going wild.
with garden plants, yeah, which were not at all uncommon there. So I suspect that's probably how those got there.
Oh, interesting. Thanks so much.
Oh, of course, Ed. Okay, well,
Where are you going next?
we haven't gone anywhere in the last 2.5 years.
Mhm.
We'd sure like to. We had a couple of trips planned right before the pandemic hit. One was a cruise that was going to go from Hong Kong all the way to London through the Far East.
Oh my
through
gosh.
the Suez Canal, through the
Wow.
Mediterranean, and
Ugh.
of course was canceled.
Mhm.
And then we were going to go on a trip to another cruise through the Balkans.
Hmm.
And we actually canceled that because it was just so uncertain. We didn't know what the heck was going on. And now all the unpleasantness in Russia, the whole thing was canceled anyway.
Yeah, really.
Go to St. Petersburg. And so that's all out the window.
Mm.
So I don't know. We don't have any really big plans. Our travels the last 2 years have been just mainly local things. We haven't gone any farther than Southern California and a number of places in Arizona, but
Mhm.
Well, that ain't bad.
I got some lists from South Georgia Island from the Q folks. There are 25 native species in South Georgia of plants and 84 introduced species. Well, they outnumber the natives.
Oh yeah, they way outnumber them. I think I put that up on one of my slides that I whizzed through. But there are far more introduced species than native, which, I mean, you can see why there wouldn't be tons of natives there because it's so remote. Okay, oh, let's see. There's all this chat. Thank you for putting all these chats in here, which I didn't even look at. Here's where you can send your annual dues.
Yeah, people were adding some things,
Yeah.
like I think one of the algae you showed was a diatom and some stuff like that.
Oh,
so.
I bet there were. I bet, Jean, are you there? I can see your picture. You probably figured out the ones that I didn't identify correctly.
Yeah, he's the one that said they were diatoms.
Great. Okay. thank you.
Thank you, Doug. Great show.
Oh, thank you.
Another vacation I've been able to take without spending a dime.
Well, this was,
Stayed warm.
Right.
this was just the absolutely greatest trip we ever took anywhere.
That's cool to hear. It's amazing the places you went and all those penguins and
Yeah.
scenery and the glaciers and everything.
Well, the whole thing was, I mean, this ship, well, now, I don't know, I think just even within the last few years, big cruise ships are now going to Antarctica.
Mm.
And they're chugging on down there, and they can't get around as like the ship we were on, which was way, way smaller.
Mm-hmm.
But this ship was, the whole thing was just run so beautifully. They had, as I mentioned, about 10 different naturalists, and they give lectures, and they would go with
That's
you
awesome.
out onto the, with the trips when we did go on shore, or we would sometimes just, circle around an island or something. And I couldn't say nice enough things about them. And the ship was just so comfortable. The accommodations were beautiful. Food was fantastic. And
What was the company called again?
gosh, it was arranged. These things are all kind of, let's see, we booked it through an agency. But the ship itself was actually chartered. What's the name of this?
Yeah, those smaller groups seem to be the way to go. We have a friend who does trips like that, and she said they're the best because you're not on like a traveling city. You're on a smaller ship with a limited number of people, and it's just a whole different experience.
Yeah, it was just great. Polar Cruises. Thanks, Arlene.
Polar Cruises.
That was and so this ship, for example, was arranged through this Polar Cruises agency.
Mm-hmm.
But the actual cruise itself was, and we met the man who he set this thing up, and he leases the ship and make all the arrangements for he didn't own the ship, but he and made arrangements for and he was a super cool guy. He was originally Taiwanese, but then he was wound up in America, and his wife was Taiwanese too, and he was the nicest guy. And we'd eat a lot of our meals with him and so forth. But anyway, he arranged this whole thing. I don't know how it was worked out, but the travel agency is the one that just set everything up. But the managing something like this is not trivial, because you have to go ashore, and things change. For example, we wound up, something had to be changed. We spent an extra day in the Falkland Islands, but they were able to wicker everything around, and we didn't have any problems at all with them rearranging something and making another stop. But it wasn't like they could just go wherever they wanted and stop. It was fairly well controlled. So anyway, there you go. But we just really enjoyed that. The only drawback was they didn't have a casino. That was disappointing.
Well,
It was, you got something out,
I know you're really disappointed by that.
Yeah, right. And the entertainment consisted of all of the crew. Everybody would help out with when we'd go ashore. Even they had a doctor on board, a New Zealand guy who was a super neat guy. Everybody would help out with the tours. They go ashore, help offload people, and make sure everybody was not getting in trouble or anything. It was nice.
That's cool. That's great.
Yeah.
Oh,
So,
oh, okay.
okay. Well, thanks again, everybody. And
Thank you.
We'll tune in next month and see what's going on.
Sounds good.
It's not, I mean, I guess the one positive thing about the pandemic was being able to do things like this with the Zoom and everything.